What would happen if the person being humiliated on a plane turned out to be the actual owner of the airline? Ethan Caldwell was not the kind of billionaire splashed across magazine covers with a dazzling smile, nor the type chased by the press for flashy interviews. At 42, he was known as the silent brain of the tech world, the founder and CEO of Nova Sphere Systems, the company quietly powering global supply chains with advanced data platforms and predictive technology few people even realized existed. His name rarely appeared in public headlines, only in private boardrooms where billion-dollar deals were struck, where his words alone could determine the future of entire corporations. But today, he was in a place no one would have expected, the business-class lounge at JFK Airport, waiting for a flight to Zurich. He looked more like a refined, understated businessman than a billionaire. A charcoal grey cashmere sweater, tailored pinstripe trousers, and polished leather shoes that were elegant without being ostentatious. Everything about him exuded a quiet, restrained sophistication, the kind only those with true discernment could appreciate. On his wrist was a rare Vacheron Constantin timepiece, a mechanical masterpiece only true connoisseurs would recognize for its worth. Ethan sat silently in a chair by the large glass window, his gaze fixed on the planes lining up along the runway. There was something different in his contemplative expression, not the excitement of a man about to travel for business, but the focused calculation of a strategist preparing a decisive move. This trip was far more than just another meeting. Within the next 24 hours, Ethan would finalize what was being called a historic turning point: the acquisition of Apex Global Holdings, a multinational conglomerate controlling manufacturing, logistics, and most importantly, a majority stake in Skylux Airways, the very airline he was about to board. Codenamed Project Atlas, the deal would expand Nova Sphere's reach worldwide, cementing Ethan's position as one of the most powerful figures on the planet. But no one in the lounge knew any of this. To everyone around him, he was simply a quiet passenger, sipping his black coffee, blending in as if he were no one special. And no one could have imagined that just a few hours later, this seemingly unassuming man would change the fate of an entire airline in a way no one had ever dared to think possible. The first-class cabin of Skylux Airways exuded modern luxury, with plush leather seats, an elegant minibar, and an atmosphere so quiet that the soft clink of crystal glasses could be heard clearly. Ethan Caldwell stepped inside, offering a polite nod to the flight attendant at the door, a faint, courteous smile on his face. Yet he moved with a composure that drew no unnecessary attention. He made his way to seat 1A, a private window, side spot reserved for the airline's most elite passengers. Placing his leather briefcase neatly in the overhead compartment, he removed his jacket, hung it carefully, and sat down, his gaze fixed on the pale, grey sky outside. A young flight attendant offered wine, but Ethan requested only water. He needed a clear mind for the intense meetings awaiting him in the coming hours. The calm did not last long. The sharp sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the cabin, followed by an irritated male voice cutting through the silence. "This is absolutely unacceptable." Every head in first class turned toward the door. The man storming in was Gregory Shaw, his face flushed with anger. He wore an expensive suit that was slightly disheveled, and a flashy gold watch glinted on his wrist, as if desperately trying to broadcast his status. A middle-aged flight attendant followed closely behind, speaking in a tone strained with patience. "Mr. Shaw, we sincerely apologize, but there was a system error that resulted in an overbooking of first-class seats. We are working to resolve the issue." Gregory brushed her off with a dismissive wave, his voice rising even louder. "I am a platinum-tier passenger of this airline. I always sit in seat 1A. I don't care about your system errors. I want my seat, and I want it now." Several passengers exchanged glances, some frowning, a few shaking their heads, but no one spoke up. Gregory scanned the cabin until his eyes landed on Ethan Caldwell. A calculating glint flashed in his gaze, as if he had just found his solution. Pointing directly at Ethan, Gregory said loudly, "What about that seat? He can move. He doesn't look like a frequent Skylux passenger anyway." The words dripped with condescension, and the atmosphere in the cabin grew heavier. The flight attendant, Paula Benson, looked uncertain for a brief moment, her gaze shifting between Gregory and Ethan. Then she tilted her head, walked closer to seat 1A, and spoke in a firmer, less courteous tone than before. "Sir, I'm sorry, but there has been a mix-up. We need this seat for a very important passenger. I'm going to have to ask you to cooperate and move to a different cabin." Ethan sat quietly, his hands clasped loosely on his lap, his eyes calm but unwavering as he looked at Paula. His voice was smooth and polite, yet carried an unshakable firmness. "I have a valid ticket, and this is my seat. I don't intend to move." Paula's brow furrowed slightly, her patience thinning, while Gregory Shaw stood just behind her with his arms crossed, a smug grin tugging at his lips. What no one in that cabin yet realized was that this seemingly small confrontation would soon ignite a storm that none of them could have possibly imagined. The first-class cabin fell into an uncanny silence, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Paula Benson tilted her head, her eyes now devoid of any courtesy. Her voice was no longer the soft, polite tone reserved for passengers, but rather the commanding tone of someone giving orders to a subordinate. "Sir, this is a special situation. We need this seat immediately. You should cooperate." Her tone carried a finality that suggested no room for argument. Behind Paula, Gregory Shaw smirked, his arrogant grin spreading as if he had already won. He spoke again, his voice lower this time, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Move him back where he belongs. People like him don't belong here." His words sliced through the tense atmosphere like a cold blade. A few passengers glanced at each other uneasily. Some frowned in discomfort, while others lowered their heads pretending to read or look at their phones, clearly unwilling to get involved. Ethan Caldwell sat still, his hands resting neatly on his lap, his calm but piercing gaze fixed on Paula. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost unexpectedly so, but each word was precise and deliberate. "I paid for this seat. I have no intention of moving, and I don't believe anyone has the right to decide where I belong." Paula blinked, but instead of listening, her tone hardened, cold and unyielding. "If you refuse to cooperate, I'll have to call the lead purser to handle this. We can't delay the flight because of one person." At the back of the cabin, soft murmurs rippled through the air. A German couple frowned, clearly displeased with the situation. A young woman stared at Paula, waiting for an explanation. but no one spoke up. Ethan's gaze swept across all the faces in the cabin, but he found no intervention, only averted eyes and silent avoidance. In that moment, his eyes narrowed slightly, a chill settling over his otherwise composed face. He exhaled slowly, then gave a small nod. It wasn't a nod of agreement, but rather the acceptance of a decision he had just made in his mind. Ethan stood. He unfastened his seatbelt, took his coat from the hook, and his movements were slow, almost deliberate, like a challenge. Turning to Paula and Gregory, his voice was steady, polite, but carried a weight of authority that was impossible to ignore. "I'll leave this seat, but before I go, I need your full name and the name of the lead purser who will be taking over this situation." Paula hesitated for a brief second, but answered with a self-satisfied tone. "Paula Benson, purser of this flight. The lead purser will meet you shortly." Ethan gave a single nod, the corners of his lips curling into a faint, unreadable smile. He turned and walked past Gregory Shaw, who smirked triumphantly, leaning slightly forward to whisper just loud enough for Ethan to hear. "Go back where you belong." Ethan didn't respond. He continued walking, his strides calm and deliberate, passing row after row until he reached seat 38E, crammed near the restroom, where the faint smell of food lingered in the air. Sitting down, he placed his hand lightly on his phone. No one around him realized that with just one small action to follow, the fate of the entire airline was about to change forever. The cramped seat 38E, pressed up against the restroom and filled with the constant hum of the engines, didn't seem to bother Ethan Caldwell. He sat upright, his gaze fixed on the small window where clouds drifted lazily by. His face remained calm, but his eyes no longer held the quiet composure of an ordinary passenger. Instead, they carried the sharp, calculating intensity of a man plotting every move with precision. Slowly, he pulled a specialized phone from the pocket of his coat, a secure device used only by those operating in the highest echelons of global finance. Without hesitation, his fingers moved quickly across the screen, entering a short, pre-programmed sequence. Within seconds, an encrypted message was sent. "Atlas Protocol. Execute Omega Command immediately." The recipient of that message was none other than Claire Monroe, the trusted chief operating officer of Novasphere and Ethan's most reliable ally. Across the ocean, only minutes after decrypting the message, Claire would activate one of the most powerful clauses in the acquisition contract for Apex Global Holdings, a clause granting Novasphere immediate operational control over the entire conglomerate before the official paperwork was completed. It was a contingency reserved only for emergencies, but Ethan had chosen to deploy it for a single reason: a blatant act of discrimination that had just occurred in seat 1A. In that cramped cabin, Ethan tilted his head slightly against the seat, his eyes closing briefly as his mind worked like a finely tuned machine. Just minutes ago, he had been openly insulted by a senior flight attendant and humiliated by an arrogant man in front of dozens of people. But now, with a single message, he had shifted the entire balance of power. As the plane accelerated down the runway, billions of dollars were already moving across the globe. A subtle vibration buzzed in his pocket. Ethan opened his eyes and glanced at the screen. A reply from Claire appeared clearly. "Omega Command executed. Operational control of Apex and Skylux Airways is now yours." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, not the smile of someone pleased, but the quiet satisfaction of a man placing the final piece on a board of power. Ethan set the phone down, his gaze fixed ahead at the flight attendants still bustling about, completely unaware that in just a few hours their entire future would rest in his hands. They thought he was just another ordinary passenger, relegated to the back of the plane. What they didn't know was that the man sitting among the smell of reheated meals and the rumble of the engines had just become the new owner of the airline they worked for. And he was ready for the next move, one that would make every single person who underestimated him pay the price for their arrogance. The steady hum of the engines filled the economy cabin, but Ethan Caldwell paid it no mind. He pulled out his secure phone once more, his calm yet razor-sharp focus unshaken. With a single call, everything that had just happened in Seat 1A would be overturned in an instant. Ethan dialed a private number, and when the line connected, his voice carried the cold precision of a verdict. "This is Ethan Caldwell. You may not have been informed yet, but as of 15 minutes ago, Nova Sphere has executed the Omega Clause. I am now the new chairman of the parent company that owns Skylux, and I am currently sitting on one of your flights." On the other end, there was a heavy silence before Robert Lemaire, CEO of Skylux Airways, responded, his voice trembling with confusion. "Mr. Caldwell, I wasn't aware. It's an honor to speak with you. I trust the crew has been taking good care of you." Ethan allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smirk, his tone lowering to something far more chilling. "Taking care of me? I was publicly humiliated in front of dozens of passengers. A lead flight attendant named Paula Benson ordered me out of my first-class seat for a platinum member. And that man, Gregory Shaw, announced in front of everyone that I should go back where I belong. Is that how your staff defines service, Mr. Lemaire?" Silence hung in the air again, heavier this time, and Robert seemed to choke on his words. After a few seconds, he stammered, "I apologize, Mr. Caldwell. This is completely unacceptable. I will." Ethan cut him off, his voice steady and commanding. "I don't want apologies. I want action. When this plane lands, your COO will be waiting at the gate to meet me in person. And here is my first directive. Paula Benson, the lead flight attendant, and the head purser, Martin Lowe, are to be immediately suspended with all system access revoked. Additionally, passenger Gregory Shaw is to be permanently banned from flying with Skylux or any of its partner airlines." Robert's breath quickened, his words unsteady. "Mr. Caldwell, I assure you this will be handled immediately. I will personally oversee it." Ethan leaned back against his seat, his eyes fixed on the small window where clouds drifted past. "Good. And don't consider this an isolated incident. This is the beginning of a full-scale reform. If I find any similar behavior happening again, it won't just be a few staff members losing their jobs. Take this as your formal warning." He ended the call, placed the phone back down, and for the first time since boarding the flight, a faint smile crossed his lips, the smile of a man holding absolute power in his hands. Meanwhile, Paula, Martin, and Gregory remained comfortably seated in first class, enjoying the flight, completely unaware that their judgment had already been signed and sealed high above the clouds. The wheels of the plane touched down softly on the Zurich runway, a smooth click signaling a safe landing. But for some people on this flight, this was not just another destination. It was the end of their careers. Passengers began unfastening their seatbelts, some already standing to retrieve their luggage. In first class, Gregory Shaw adjusted his tie, flashing a smug smile at Paula Benson, while Martin Lowe calmly reviewed the flight's paperwork, all three of them convinced everything had gone perfectly. The cabin door opened, but instead of the usual ground staff, 4 men in black suits stood waiting at the entrance, led by a middle-aged Asian man with a stern expression. He wore a perfectly tailored grey suit, his tie neatly knotted, and his sharp gaze swept across the cabin like a blade. Murmurs spread among the passengers, some exchanging curious glances. The man was none other than Daniel Cross, the Chief Executive Officer of Skylux, summoned personally by Ethan Caldwell. Daniel did not stop in first class as expected. He moved quickly down the aisle until he reached the very back of the plane, where Ethan sat in seat 38E. The moment their eyes met, Daniel inclined his head slightly, his expression a mixture of tension and respect. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice low but carrying across the nearby seats. "It is an honor to welcome you. On behalf of Skylux, I offer my deepest apologies for what happened." Ethan stood, his face calm, his words measured but loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I trust you've carried out my instructions." Daniel nodded firmly. "Yes, sir. Immediately." The cabin grew louder with hushed whispers as Daniel turned and gestured to 2 security staff. They walked briskly toward first class. Paula Benson, still standing near Gregory Shaw, froze when she saw Daniel approach. "Ms. Paula Benson?" Daniel asked, his voice sharp. Paula nodded, trying to maintain professionalism. "Yes, that's me. Is there some problem?" Daniel cut her off coldly. "By direct order of the new chairman of our parent company, you are hereby suspended effective immediately. All your access to Skylux systems has been revoked. Please follow the security staff and leave the aircraft at once." Paula's face went pale, her eyes wide with shock, while Gregory Shaw's smug smile faltered, his expression stiffening in disbelief. Martin Lowe was next, similarly ordered off the plane. Passengers started whispering more audibly, some raising their phones to record what was happening. But the final blow was yet to come. Daniel turned to Gregory, his voice losing all restraint. "Mr. Gregory Shaw, by order of the new chairman, you are permanently banned from flying with Skylux and all partner airlines. This decision takes effect immediately." Gregory's face drained of color. He sputtered angrily. "You can't do this! I'm a platinum passenger. I have rights." Ethan's voice cut through his protest, calm but carrying a weight that silenced the entire cabin. "You have no rights here. Not on this plane. Not in this system. And certainly not in the world I control." Ethan stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over Paula, Martin, and Gregory, whose faces were now ghostly pale. "This was never about a seat. This is about character. And in my system, people who do not respect others have no place." Paula and Martin were escorted off the plane under the stunned stares of passengers, while Gregory, despite his outrage, was forced to leave with his head lowered. Whispers filled the cabin, and a few passengers even began clapping quietly, unable to hide their satisfaction. Ethan said nothing more. He simply turned to Daniel. "The next steps, we'll discuss them after we leave the plane." Daniel nodded solemnly. In that moment, everyone understood. The quiet man sitting in the back of the plane was the one who had just changed the fate of an entire airline with a single phone call. Right after leaving the plane, Ethan Caldwell and Daniel Cross walked straight into the VIP conference room at Zurich Airport. The room was spacious, with glass walls overlooking the runway, sunlight streaming in. Yet the air inside felt tense enough to stop a heartbeat. Daniel stood upright, his face still carrying the weight of what had just happened. Ethan sat down, placing his leather briefcase on the table, removing his watch and setting it beside him. His gaze remained as calm as ever, but every word that followed carried the weight of a command. "Daniel," he began, his voice low and steady, yet powerful enough to silence the entire room. What happened on that flight wasn't an isolated incident. It's a symptom of something far worse, a rotten culture that has been allowed to grow inside Skylux for far too long. Daniel swallowed hard and gave a hesitant nod. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell, I admit there have been complaints before. But," Ethan cut him off with a sharp look, "no more buts. Starting now, we will change everything, from the way a passenger is greeted to how we evaluate every single employee. This isn't just an airline. This is a global brand, and every employee must understand this. Respect for people is non-negotiable." He placed his hand flat on the table, his piercing gaze locked on Daniel. "You will immediately establish a new body, called the Passenger Dignity Assurance Office. It will operate independently and report directly to me. Any act of discrimination, no matter how small, will be dealt with harshly. And I want you, Daniel Cross, to lead this office personally." Daniel froze for a brief second, his eyes flashing with both surprise and pressure. I am honored, sir. I will ensure everything is carried out exactly as you command." Ethan gave a slight nod, but his tone remained firm and cold. "I don't need promises. I need results. And one more thing. I want to know the name of the flight attendant in the economy cabin, the only one who looked at me with genuine kindness as I walked to the back of the plane. She didn't say a word, but I saw empathy in her eyes." Daniel quickly opened his tablet, scrolling through the employee list. "Elena Torres, sir. She's only been with us for 2 years. Ethan allowed himself a faint smile, the first since boarding the flight. "Good. Call her. I want her promoted to cabin manager immediately. The future of Skylux will be built by people like her, not by people like Paula Benson." Daniel bowed his head in agreement. Ethan stood, picked up his briefcase, and walked out of the room. His figure stretched long across the polished glass floor, commanding and resolute like a silent declaration. From this day forward, Skylux would no longer be the same airline. It would have a new face, a system where respect was no longer just a slogan, but an unbreakable law. 2 weeks later, high above the European skies, the Skylux Airways flight followed its usual route, but everything inside had changed completely. Ethan Caldwell sat in seat 1A, the very seat that had been taken from him so humiliatingly before. But today, the first-class cabin radiated an entirely different atmosphere. The new chief flight attendant, A young woman with a confident demeanor approached and bowed slightly. "Mr. Caldwell, on behalf of the entire crew, it is an honor to serve you. If there is anything you need, please let us know immediately." Her tone was sincere, her eyes reflecting genuine respect, not the false politeness Ethan had witnessed in the past. He nodded, offering a faint smile, not because he was pleased with the special treatment, but because he knew that what he had set in motion was already taking effect. In just 2 weeks, the Passenger Dignity Assurance Office, directly led by Daniel Cross, had begun a complete overhaul. New training protocols were issued. People like Paula Benson and Martin Lowe were removed, while dedicated employees like Eleanor Torres were given the opportunity to lead and inspire their colleagues. Skylux was no longer an airline ruled by quiet prejudice, but was gradually becoming a model for the entire industry in fair and humane treatment of passengers. Ethan leaned his head back against the seat, gazing out the window. The sunset stretched across the clouds, casting shimmering streaks of gold and orange. He remembered the moment he was forced out of this seat, the triumphant look in Gregory Shaw's eyes, and Paula Benson's cold, firm voice. All of that was now in the past. Gregory, according to Daniel's report, had been cut off from multiple business contracts after the flight ban. His company was losing credibility as partners distanced themselves from a man branded as ethically unfit. Paula and Martin, once so sure of their authority to judge others, were now blacklisted in the airline industry, with no chance of reclaiming their former positions. Ethan took a slow sip of his black coffee, his deep eyes glinting with a barely perceptible satisfaction. He wasn't pleased because of revenge. This was never about personal retribution. He was satisfied because he had proven one thing. True power does not lie in the seat you occupy, but in your ability to change an entire system with a single, decisive move. People might humiliate you in a moment, but if you have the resolve, you can change the entire game. The plane gave a slight tremor as it passed through a large cloud, but inside the first-class cabin, the atmosphere remained calm. Ethan leaned back, his gaze distant, a faint smile forming on his lips. Up here in the sky, justice had been served, not through loud words or grand gestures, but through the cold, precise power of a true strategist. And for Ethan Caldwell, this was only the beginning of a new era. One where respect was no longer a privilege, but a basic right that everyone deserved. This story reveals an important truth. Real power does not lie in the seat you occupy, but in how you use it to change an entire system. Ethan Caldwell did not need to raise his voice. He did not seek personal revenge. He simply let his actions and principles guide him, and the results spoke for themselves. If you believe that respect should be a fundamental value everywhere, hit like and subscribe to help spread this message. And leave a comment right below this video with the words, "Respect first," to remind us all that every great change begins with the simplest of actions.